No, we're good. We're good. Um, no, we're good. We're good. Okay. I know so people should be able to hear me. I know so people should be able to hear me. Your turn. Can say something. I know so people should be able to hear me. Your turn. Can say something. I know so people should be. Your turn. Can say something. No, still waiting to hear back. Can you hear my guest? No, still waiting to hear back. Can you hear my guest? No, apparently not. And I'm apparently echoing. Can you hear my guest? Apparently not. And I'm apparently echoing. So apparently not. And I'm apparently echoing. So I can. I can hear you. Uh, I can. Right, I'm going to try. I can hear you. I can. Right, I can. Right, I can. Right, I can. Okay, folks. Sorry for the delay and the technical issues. Okay, folks. Sorry for So if I can get some feedback from the chat, you can hear me and I'm not currently echoing, correct? Okay. You say something. All right. I'm going to change the capture device. Okay. Nope, now I'm just doing it twice.
I make sound now.
Heard the guest and heard me. Am I echoing? I very much appreciate you folks and your. Okay.
Yay.
So if anybody is curious, the alchemical formula of setting this up is the audio input capture has to be through my microphone and the audio output capture has to be through my earpiece. But if I set up the audio output capture through my other headphones, then it echoes.
That's very strange, but all right. We're here now.
We're here now.
Yay. But I'm glad we got there, you know.
Yeah.
I, Setting up a stream, technical issues. It's just part of the formula, right?
All right. So we're just going to start over, everybody. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Consent Academy Twitch stream. My name is Sar Surmic. I'm an educator with the Consent Academy and one of the founders. With me today is my guest.
Hi, I'm Nix Lunea. I use they, them pronouns, and I am a new volunteer to the Consent Academy, but I am not new to consent or consent education. I've been very passionate about it since 2012.
Thank you. We are going to talk about consent and love. It is currently February 13th, it is the day before Valentine's Day. Um, and for those of you who are not currently thinking about the Super Bowl, uh, many people are thinking about, what do I do for Valentine's Day? How do I do Valentine's Day correctly? How does consent fit into all of these things? Et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So we thought this would be a great time to talk about consent and love, which of course covers such a wide range of things.
It sure does.
Nixon, when you think of consent and love, what do you think of? What comes to mind?
I think honestly, one of the first things that comes to mind is boundaries, like respecting your own and respecting others.
Can you define boundaries for folks?
Boundaries are basically like your rules for yourself, like this is what I'm willing to accept, this is what I'm not willing to accept, and these are my conditions. And like everybody has those. And it's important that you respect other people's boundaries as much as respecting your own.
Nice. Nice.
Well, what comes to mind for you? I'm curious.
Too many things, I think, is the problem.
Fair.
Like love. For those of you who don't know me or haven't seen me before, um, I am a complexifier, right? Like there are people in the world who take very difficult to understand concepts and can squish them down into simple, easy to understand things. I take simple and easy to understand things and make them incredibly complex. Love is one of those things that if you ask someone, do you understand what love is? They'll say, of course I do. And then you ask them to explain it, and often they'll just sort of trip all over themselves trying to come up with other words that fit their feeling and definition and experience of love. And so, like, I think of, I think of the sort of the standard, like relationships. I'm a relational therapist. Um, and so I work with people in relationships and marriages and polycules and the whole nine yards. And so I often think about that first. But I also think of love for one's children and love for one's job and love for oneself and love for one's pets
And your community, your friends, your family.
there's just
It's there's so many different kinds of love,
yeah. And we use this one word to define all of those things.
which is it's you know what, now that you say that, this is going to be one of those things for me. You just complexified it for me so immensely.
And I think, you know, I don't know, folks are on the stream, like, what is love to you?
Yeah.
What do you think of when you hear the word the first time? Like I grew up thinking of love in a very fairy book way, fairy tale kind of way. Um, the epitome of love, was to rescue the damsel, get married, and have children.
Hmm. That is the thing that most of us were fed as kids.
Yeah. And as I got older, I realized that that was just kind of BS.
Yeah.
Mostly because of the women I really wanted to be with, and later in my life, the men I wanted to be with, were not the ones that should be rescued.
it's it's like when I think about love, I think about love less as like this extremely definable concept and more ways that like love is shown, which could it varies from person to person. Like for example, a thing that like my husband does to show his love for me is like when he makes pasta, right? Because we put broccoli in our pasta because we like it. um, but
Fair.
like he'll give me more broccoli because I love it more. You know, like I adore broccoli. It's one of my favorite foods. And so he gives me a bunch. And that's like one of his ways of showing love to me. And it's very sweet.
Hmm.
And I like a big thing for me is, like just telling people that I care about them and I value them. And I'm a very big talker. I love using my words. And so I'm very much one of those people who says how I feel. And that usually is capped with and I love you.
Hmm.
And all of the things that precede it are like, and this is how I love you, you know?
Right. Right. One of the folks on the chat mentions things like dedication, intimacy, vulnerability as part of
Mm-hmm.
romantic love, which I
Absolutely.
think is very insightful.
Definitely. That is a very, very good take, Orchist. And Orchist. I'm so sorry if I say your username wrong. Um, but it's like, see, and as an asexual person, it's really interesting because like intimacy can even mean so many things, right?
Absolutely.
Because like for some people, intimacy just means sex. But like for me, one of the most fulfilling things in life is like emotional intimacy with somebody.
Yeah. I'm actually, especially as I've gotten older, um, and I've engaged in a lot of intellectual intimacy,
Mm,
sharing of ideas and thoughts and concepts, um,
yes.
building new ideas or brainstorming things uh, is I found to be an incredible intimacy, but not one anybody talked about when I was younger.
Yeah. Now that you bring it up, absolutely.
Yeah, and like it's something that I've come to love so much as part of my life that the people I choose to spend time with, the people I choose to date, the people I interact with, right? There is some degree of are they people who I can share that cognitive intimacy, that intellectual intimacy with.
Yeah.
It's
Oh,
become one of my more defining criteria. You know, it's also nice if there is sexual attraction and emotional attraction and other things. Um, but it's just one of the things that I found that's most important for me. For you, the grand you in this case, um, it could be all sorts of things. Um, and this is where I think we get into some trouble where one person's intimacy is different than another person's intimacy.
absolutely. That's another big thing that's imperative when it comes to any type of relationships is communication, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like saying, this is what intimacy means to me. What does it mean to you? Oh, and Kelly Crow asks, so how do you get to consent with others in seeking these kinds of intimacy? Um,
What a wonderful segue.
Honestly, that's amazing. For me personally, if I'm gonna like have a big old chat with somebody about feelings or about ideas, I usually check in with somebody about like where their capacity is at. Like, hey, is it okay if I run something by you? Or it's like, hey, can we talk about something? It might be kind of heavy. Or like, hey, is it okay if I like emotionally gush for a second?
Mm-hmm.
And then they're either like, yeah, or not today. Can we do that tomorrow? Or no, thank you. And it's okay.
Right. I mean, it sounds, I think, a little too simplistic sometimes, but just the is it okay if I express the intimacy that I want, right? To just ask the question first and see what response you get. Of course, and then to honor and respect the response you get. Um, you know, hey, is it okay if I hug you?
Yes,
Right? Is a physical intimacy.
that is a huge one. Like, I am a hugger. I love hugs. I thrive off of hugs, but I have people in my life who I love dearly who are not huggers,
Okay,
right? Or are like situational huggers.
sure, sure.
So I always ask people, like, can we hug? And I mean, things have changed because of the pandemic. So, like, pre pandemic, it would be like, hell yeah, hugs, or like, no. And so, okay, you
Yeah,
know?
I feel like our new pandemic question is, may I share the air that you breathe?
Oh, no kidding. Which is so fucking intimate. Am I allowed to swear? I'm sorry.
Yeah, we're fine.
Okay. I
We're,
realized what I said. It was like, oh, oops, oops.
no, no, no. We're not allowed to use like our channel agreements and guidelines say that we're not allowed to use oppressive language
Oh,
and harmful language, but swearing is you know we try to keep it to a minimum because these suckers end up on YouTube. But
that's fair. Then
yeah,
I will do my best. Oopsie daisy. That was the thing I should have asked about beforehand, and I apologize.
it's all right. Totally good.
Um, but it's like you brought up sharing the air with somebody, and it's like I was talking with somebody a few months ago about how like blown glass, like that you do yourself and you give to somebody as a present is such an intensely intimate, beautiful gift because it's like you are literally giving somebody the air from your lungs. And
Trapped.
it's yeah, and it's just like I give you the air from my lungs. I give you like my a piece of my life, and like that just blew my mind. So anyway, thank you for my little tangent.
Not at all. I don't know if you know. There there's a specific name and I can't remember what it was, but there was a practice. Um, I want to say back in the 17 or 1800s. Chat, you can tell me if I get it wrong. Um, where they would capture the last breath of a person in a bottle. They'd hold a bottle under the person's nose and then they'd stopper it. And they were catching their last breath um,
Dang,
as a
that
as a memento mori.
that's beautiful. Okay, so memento mori, that was a lot of like Victorian stuff. My dog just started dreaming in her sleep. So if you hear little like boop boop sounds, if they come through my mic, I apologize. That's Ellie. She's dreaming.
Totally fine. It's totally fine. Um, but yeah, so the idea of to go back, like the idea of asking for consent for sharing space, for touch, for sex, for having just little tiny moments of connection, because that's intimacy comes out of connection.
Mm-hmm.
And essentially then you can think about asking for consent for intimacy by asking the person, hey, can we connect in this way? And then, of course, respecting their answer.
Mm-hmm. And it's like a thing that I see get thrown around a lot and like in person and online too is like people not understanding how to ask for that intimacy and thinking that they're going to be bringing the mood down or slow things down too much by asking or that it's going to be awkward, you know?
Yeah.
And it's like it doesn't have to be and it shows that you respect the other person so much by asking.
Do you have an example?
Yes. Um fun things like, so is it okay if I kiss you? And they can be like, yeah, or like, no, actually, I don't want to kiss you. I don't feel comfortable doing that now. And you're like, okay, that's fine. That's cool.
Right.
Like, is it okay if I hold your hand right now? And to more like intimate things, like, is it okay if I touch you there? How do you want me to touch you? Things like that.
Yeah. Yeah. And this actually gets us into talking about love, right? In relationship. Because you're talking about new relationships. Not always, because sometimes it's good to check in with people we know. Um, but we build what's called a consent framework
Mm-hmm.
with people we know, basically just what they like and what they don't, where their boundaries are and where they're not, what they're okay with and what they're not okay with. Um, and every time we interact with somebody, we update that framework to
Mm-hmm.
with whatever new information we get. And so one of the things that I hear all the time is, well, I've known my partner for X number of years. I'm not going to ask them to consent every time I touch their body. How do we address that? How do we address that difference, that tension?
Attention. I mean, have a conversation about it. Like, would you like me to ask you before I touch you? In what situations would you want me to ask if it's okay if I touch you or how I touch you? Because I mean, that's certainly a thing that I do in my relationship of just shy of a decade.
Mm-hmm.
Like we ask each other all the time. Like if he's, I don't know, on a work call or something, and I like go into the room to fill up his water bottle and like, I don't know, tidy up or whatever, just like, is it okay if I smooch you on the cheek right now? Like it's okay to ask, but like use your words.
Yes.
Ask what the other person wants and is okay with. Because like not everybody needs that. And some people it makes all the difference.
And finding out what the other person's preference is the perfect place to start.
Mm-hmm.
Right? It's like how much how much asking do you want?
Mm-hmm.
Right? What level of consent are you looking for? And some of the most like the more intimate you go, right, being a little bit more explicit. Like, you know, is it okay if I just come up and hug you? Right. And then as we said, like, listen to the answer because I know some people for like it's totally fine for you to come up and hug me when we're at home.
Mm-hmm.
But if we're out amongst a bunch of other people, that makes me uncomfortable. Right. And in that case, just ask me first. And so sometimes even someone you've been with for decades, there's going to be a more complex set of rules around what their boundaries are
Mm-hmm. And people's boundaries can change with time.
and should change with
Mm-hmm.
time.
Mm-hmm.
Like if your boundaries remain the same as you they were when you were 5 years old, I mean, okay, we'd all be getting more nap time, but it wouldn't work so well.
No, no. It's like because we're always like growing and changing as people, and our boundaries are gonna change as we change. And I'm like, I'm a talker. I like to use my words, very many. And so I'm very much just like bursts into the room. I've decided that today I don't think I want to be hugged. My processing, like my like my autism being touched stuff is really going off, and I don't think I can handle a hug today. You know,
Mm-hmm.
that's a new boundary, and it might not be that tomorrow. But then the husband asks the next day, like, "Is it okay if I hug you?" And I'm like, "I can be hugged." Like,
Yeah. And I think it's sometimes more difficult for folks who have just grown up with a set of assumptions and expectations
mm-hmm.
to move into a place that is more defined.
Yeah.
Um, and I think also it feels risky sometimes. Like, because if we ask, we might get rejected.
But I think it's really important to sit with like how the rejection isn't inherently bad. Like it doesn't mean that you're bad or you've done something bad or what you want is bad.
Yeah.
It's just something that that person does not want at that moment or tomorrow or ever, and that's okay.
And it seems difficult in my experience for some people to understand that that is okay.
Mm-hmm.
Has that been your experience too?
I know quite a few people where it's been that where it's like, but if they say no, that means that they don't love me anymore. If they say that they don't want this, like I'm gonna be so freaking sad. If it's like, but then if they say no to this, that must mean that what I want is bad, which means that I'm yucky.
Mm-hmm.
And it's just like, well, no, it's not. Have, that's not what that means.
Yeah. Yeah,
And
at some point we should do a stream on attachment issues, but
yes, that would be fun.
that's way too in depth for this particular topic.
Fair.
Um, but it does bring up the concept of. So we talked about like I said, I growing up this very fairy tale concept of love, um, and it did somewhat define my first relationship. Went back when I was in high school. Very heterosexual, very monogamous, very my job to rescue you um, kind of things. And, it wasn't healthy, but I didn't know that at the time.
Exactly.
And like I grew up with this set of expectations, right, of what was right to do, what I should do, um, as the boy in the relationship, what that meant. Valentine's days were always these really big affairs where I bought gifts and I bought flowers and we went out on a special date, right? All of these things that were sort of baked into my cultural assumptions.
Yeah. And like I had a little bit of a different experience, and I think a huge part of that is being asexual
I'm
and
sure.
being in the closet queer until I was 19. Um, but so much of it for me, it was just like because the thing that my mom, like I was raised by a single mom, so I was instilled with some pretty awesome things. Like you can't fix anybody. You can be there for people, but you can't fix them.
Right.
Um, that like what matters for you most in a relationship is that you're happy, healthy, and okay. And so I didn't even get into my first relationship until I was 18, you know? And it's just, it gave me a pretty decent set of standards, I think.
Mm-hmm.
But, and it's also like a huge thing that my mom instilled in me ever since I was an itty bitty tot is whether or not she realized it, autonomy, but in that, like, nobody has the right to touch you if you don't want to be touched.
Nice.
You have the right to your space. And so I grew up with that, and seeing other people not have that same understanding always blew my little child mind. I was like, but this is my bubble, you know? So,
Well, it's interesting because, like, I was taught, and not necessarily even by my parents, right, by my peers and culture and media and all that,
mm-hmm.
that I was just supposed to know when it was okay to touch my partner. That I was just like I should intuitively be able to guess correctly 100% of the time when they want to be touched, where they want to be touched, how they want to be touched, and for how long they want to be touched.
Yeah, because it's like that is a thing that I saw so much in media growing up too, as it's, oh, but that girl's just playing hard to get. You just as like the tough but hot and moody boy, you need to grab her and shove her up against a wall and smooch her and touch her boob and then she'll know.
Right.
And it's like, whoa. And then again, me with what my mom instilled in me going, that doesn't seem right. But did I have the words to say that? No. I was just
No.
like, But then for me, also, the asexual, I was like, that doesn't seem nice.
That
So,
doesn't seem right on so many levels.
but yeah, the asexuality adds a whole other level to my experience with things.
Sure, sure, sure. Yeah, and so I think like one of the reasons why we teach consent is to be able to cross that gap,
Mm-hmm.
right? Is to remove the oh, you just have to intuit gap and actually move into maybe ask the person what they want and then do that.
Mm-hmm.
Um, like there are people who love getting thrown up against a wall
Mm-hmm.
and kissed and to be rough with and all those other things. There are other people for whom that would be the most traumatizing thing of an evening, a week, or a year.
Mm-hmm. And
If
like on top of, sorry, go ahead.
no, please, please.
I was just gonna say, and then you throw in like situational, right? The person who likes to be like roughed around and have like the spicy, spicy. They don't necessarily want that at Walmart. Or like when you're over at their families for dinner, like
It makes Thanksgiving very awkward sometimes.
it sure could. But
But
again, there comes the situational and the conversation and the
yeah,
asking.
and the communication, like you said before,
Yes,
like just
use your words.
yeah. And I think the problem is that so many of us grew up believing that we were supposed to do it and do it right.
Mm-hmm.
And I think the real kicker to that is then often when it didn't go well, right? The person who was doing the acting would then blame the person who was being acted upon for not following the script. Like,
Mm-hmm.
here's a script. We have a script. I'm following the script. Everything tells me that this should be correct. Why are you getting upset?
It's thankfully I've been really thrilled to see that media, for the most part, has moved away from that.
It's trying.
It's like a lot of it has, especially like the huge shift in children's media has been extremely exciting for me.
Yeah. Yeah, I think adult media is still trying to catch up.
Yeah. I mean, I think where you can like really see a drastic shift in this is horror movies.
Oh yeah? I don't watch a lot of horror, so
So like the house I grew up in didn't really get exposed to sci-fi or horror movies until much later in my life, and I've felt deeply in love with the genres. But it's like you watch stuff from the 80s, for example, like the 70s or the 80s when it comes to horror, and consent is non-existent. And it is so uncomfortable to watch. And then you watch things from the last, I'll be generous and say 7 years.
okay.
And there's just this huge shift in consent and
Hmm.
lessening the amount of sexualized violence toward marginalized identities and things like that. And it's just fascinating how societal shifts are are really emphasized in horror as a genre.
Yeah. Yeah, it makes me wonder, and maybe this is a stream for another time,
Mm.
um, because it used to be the trope was the people who have sex die first in a
Mm-hmm.
horror movie.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but it makes me wonder if some of the reason why more modern horror movies are able to buck that trend is because they're already transgressive. Right, the movie
It's
itself is already transgressing societal norms.
it's more why that's starting to die out is because it became such a solidified trope that people expect it. You're like the party girl, she's going down, and then lo and behold, she's the final girl, and you're like, this is amazing. But then sometimes they'll still get you. They're like, oh, she's gonna live, she's gonna live. She's like, nope. And then you're like, oh, but she didn't die first. So that this is a talk for October, I think.
Yeah, I mean the progressive movement of horror movies and who dies first.
I could go ad nauseum about that, but I shan't right now.
Well, I think it does. Bringing up somebody mentioned like in the 70s and 80s, it wasn't even a thing in comedies, right?
Yeah,
And still, if you watch romantic comedies, they're terrible when it comes to consent.
it's so uncomfortable. So uncomfortable. And even because it's like now a big thing in the like rom-coms is like they're like, well, what if we like rainbow wash it a bit? There can be like the lesbians. What about the two boys?
Hmm.
And it's still, holy crap, is it bad?
Yeah, I'm again maybe a topic for another time, but since we are
Mhm.
talking about love,
Oh yes.
right, is that how we know what love is actually a very complicated mix
Hmm.
of what we experience ourselves, what we see from our family of origin, the people we grew up with, the people who take care of us when we're infants and toddlers, um, and then media.
Hmm.
Uh, the vast majority of a person's concept of what love is, at least where they start with it, is pretty solidified by the time they're 4 or 5 years old. And you never like your 3 year old doesn't say, no, you know what, mom, I don't really want to watch that thing because it's really non consensual and everybody around me is laughing at it. I guess I should laugh at it too.
Hmm.
You know, or, oh, my parents are highly dysfunctional and don't actually get along well and are staying together for not the right reasons. Oh, yeah, that makes total sense to me as a 4 year old. Right. No, it's
It's
like, oh, this is what a normal relationship looks like with people yelling and screaming at each other.
and then when you get older, hopefully it's a lot of like processing and relearning things.
I mean, that's what we have therapy for.
Yeah.
but but I think recognizing that that concept of love is such an emotion where we
Hmm.
can put lots of words to it, and we do. I mean, pick up your favorite sonnet, but it's a feeling, and all the words we put to it are an attempt to evoke that feeling, which is sometimes different for different people.
Hmm.
So let's talk a little bit about the unrequited love trope.
Ah, yes.
And so when someone loves someone else and does all the things and is still turned down.
I mean, it sucks. It's not a good feeling. But again, going back to the beginning of this chat, boundaries, right? Like
Yes.
do what you need to heal and move on at your pace, because you can't just, you know, punch yourself in the face and fall out of love. Like, it takes time, it takes a lot of self-care and processing, but it doesn't mean that that person who turned you down or those people who turned you down are bad people. You know, like, you can still be friends with that person.
Sure.
Like, the person can still be in your life if you both choose to, in a platonic way, and that can be still wonderful and lovely and full of support and a completely different kind of love. But that's just been my lived experience.
Well, it is such a trope,
Mm-hmm.
right? That if someone just loves someone enough, they will eventually come around.
Oof. That
Say more about the oof.
it's just not how anything works, you know. I It's like, I think a really great example of that is cats. Actually,
Okay.
right? Because people can be a lot more understanding. Pardon me, my giant hairy muscle toddler doesn't know how to get under blankets by herself, so I have to help her. All those muscles mean she gets cold easily. Okay, there we go. Uh, um, oh shoot, what was I saying? I'm so sorry.
It's okay. What kind of dog do you have?
I have, the shelter paperwork says pit bull. I don't know, some kind of weird mutt with a barrel chest and a wasp waist and
Yeah.
giraffe legs. She exists. She has stripes. I
Right.
love her.
Nice. Nice. No, you were talking about the issue of unrequited love.
Oh, and that, like, if you love somebody enough, they'll come around. And how, like, I think a really good example of that is Cats, not like the movie or the musical, like the critters.
Right. Okay.
Is that for the most part, cats are super duper affectionate. They have very strict boundaries and they exist in the world as they please. And people can try to pet cats and try to snuggle on the kitties and smooch the kitties, but the cats are like, oh no, or like, heck no. And they do a swipe, they do a smackaroo, and you're like, oh, okay, okay, I'm done. Um, and people can still accept and love the cat.
Hmm.
Like, I I will let you exist in your way as you do. I won't try to touch your tummy. But it's like, when it comes to people, somehow that doesn't come across the same way.
Yeah. Well, you mentioned before the concept of autonomy that you learned
Yes.
very young, and this is where I think people get caught up. Um, Dustin in the chat mentions, when one person invests super heavy into what they imagine instead of what the reality is.
Well, that's the whole, like, fantasy versus reality thing.
Right. Right. And I think, and the problem with that is that when you do that, like when you love someone who doesn't love you back, your connection is to the fantasy,
Mm-hmm.
right? You're not actually connecting with an autonomous human being.
Mm-hmm.
And then when
It's
you,
this. Sorry.
well, and then that tension gets overwhelming in many cases.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, it sometimes becomes violent.
Which, it should never be somebody else's responsibility for them not reciprocating your feelings.
Yes.
And it's like, the person you're in your fantasy is never the person. It's this weird kind of, and I don't necessarily mean negatively weird, but it's like kind of inherently weird, because it's this like idealized up on a pedestal version of a person that is not the person who exists at all.
Yeah.
Um, And Z Sauce is asking something I'm wondering about is the difference in love you have for a friend versus love you have for a partner.
It's a great question, and it's not easy to answer.
Well, I have a very it's typically, at least with other people I've talked about this with, it's seen as kind of weird. And I attribute that a lot to my asexuality. Um, because I actually do prioritize platonic relationships as much, if not a little bit more than romantic relationships.
Hmm.
And it's like the one of the ways that like my husband and I maintain our relationship is that first and foremost, it is a friendship. He is one of my best friends, right? And on top of that, we have other fun feelings that like one of the ways that I qualify it is like I love my friends so very very much. I would take many bullets for them. I would jump in front of a car for them. I'd do the heckin' things. I love you so very much. But I do not want to touch your tongue with my tongue. Is the way I have said. It's like, yeah, that's fair, I guess.
Yeah, and it gets tricky because for some people, right, the concept of intimate friendships or even sexual friendships
Mm-hmm.
is feels very normal.
Mm-hmm.
And so, I would say like the difference in love you have for a friend versus the difference you have for a partner is entirely what you define.
Absolutely.
Caveat, what you define with the person in question.
Mm-hmm.
Because love in its healthy form is a connection.
Mm-hmm.
It's an intimacy.
Yes.
Intimacy, healthy intimacy requires connection
Mm-hmm.
with the other person, with the actual autonomous person,
Mm-hmm.
requires consent. Both people have to want to be a part of it,
Mm-hmm.
right? And requires some form of communication
Yes. Hopefully.
so that you can share all of those things back and forth with one another,
Yes.
right? And so whether it's with a friend or like a life mate, housemate, sexual partner, play partner, friend with benefits, occasional person you see once every 6 years, whatever it is, that connection has to be two sided.
Mm-hmm.
And it can only be two sided if you agree that whatever I'm giving or projecting towards the other person, they have to be okay with that. And whatever
Yes.
they give me or project towards me, I have to be okay with that. And if either of us is not, we have to have some way to have that conversation,
Mm-hmm.
right? As noted in the chat, right?
Yes.
We have to be able to check in that we're still on the same page.
Yes.
Uh,
Like relationship check-ins, regardless of what kind of relationship it is, whether the person is your friend, your coworker, your partner, your married partner, your any such thing,
yep.
you know, like checking in. That was one of the most useful things that I learned in therapy was like fact checking. Just like, hey, my brain is saying that maybe things are a little bit hecked between us, but I don't know. Can we talk about that? Are things okay?
Yeah. Seems simple and is often very, very difficult for people.
Yeah, because again, there's that fear of rejection or like, oh God, what if they are mad at me? What if they say no? What if they don't like me anymore? What if I've done something horrible? And those are all such big, complicated feelings to feel.
Yeah.
They're unpleasant. But
But if you accept that the other person is their own autonomous human being, if you expect that the other person has every right to say what they want and don't want
mm-hmm,
and be respected in those things,
mm-hmm,
it becomes easier in that you're like, oh, yeah, I should ask. right? Or I should get consent. Or even just, I want to know what's right for you.
Absolutely.
Mentioned in the chat, a lot of people don't have the tools to talk about things. And I think that's very true.
It's definitely a learned skill.
Yes. And when someone doesn't have the tools, you have some options, but they pretty much fall into either I will patiently wait until you learn the tools,
Mhm.
I will patiently wait until I realize you're not learning the tools, or I will go find somebody else who already knows the tools. Look, there's many other things you could do within those categories, but that's kind of what it comes down to.
Definitely.
Yeah. And just the ability to, like, hey, I want to be a friend. This is what being a friend means to me.
Hmm.
What does being a friend mean to you?
Hmm.
Where's the Venn diagram? Like, where's the overlapping pieces of what this means? And will that be fulfilling enough to us to engage in a friendship?
Hmm.
Same is true for a sexual partner. I know plenty of folks who engage in casual dating, um, or they're solo poly, or they're just not all that interested, and they have to define, and that's the tricky part, right? Because as soon as you go off the script, by the way, there is, side note for all of you out there, everybody has their own script. There is not
Hmm.
a social script. Everybody has their own unique script. It's just in many cases people have taken in the larger social script and only made small edits, and so they don't get caught as quickly. Uh, but as soon as as soon as you meet somebody, whatever type of intimacy you're looking for, be it friendship, sexual partner, romantic partner, etc., at some point you got to sit down and compare scripts.
Hmm.
And that is what the skill of consent does. It allows us to compare scripts in real time. Not just, oh, we're going to sit down and have the 6 hour relationship conversation. What do you want? What do I want? What has your experiences been? What have my experiences been? Where are your boundaries? Where are my boundaries? Consent and the asking of it allows us to, in real time, manage the other person's differences
Hmm.
such that we're not harming them and they're not harming us.
Yes. Boundaries.
Boundaries.
I love them. That's another important learned skill, right?
So, final thoughts. Love and Valentine's Day
Hmm.
and consent.
Hmm.
What are your final thoughts? I pretty much just gave mine. So,
Okay. Okay. If we're gonna center it specifically around Valentine's Day, I feel like we have to recognize, and this may be controversial, that Valentine's Day is just another holiday that exists to make you spend money. Um, Ask people what they want for Valentine's Day. That's a huge thing. That's because it's like not everybody's going to be comfortable with like the whole big shebang, you know. Some people maybe just want a chocolate bar and it'll be smooch on the cheek. But use your words. Ask. Always ask questions and accept the other person's response. It's that's like what all relationships boil down for to me is communication is key. Ask questions and be okay with asking those questions and hearing the answer.
nice. Nice. Well, folks, thank you for joining us in this uh, topical discussion about love and consent.
Yeah.
Obviously, we only stepped into a very small portion of this much larger topic.
Hmm.
If you would like to learn more or take additional classes about consent, please visit us at consent.academy. We offer many classes, consultations, and all sorts of other work uh, to help you live a more consensual life.
Yeah.
So, thank you all for joining us.
Thank you so much. I hope that you have a splendid day or night wherever you are in this big old wild world of ours.
We do this every week.
Hmm.
And yeah, just come find us. We're happy to talk about consent
Hmm.
a lot. Like, we talk about
Yes.
consent a lot.
Yes.
So, again, thank you, everybody, and have a good night.